So today we have a fun new project. This is a new line from Ohana Applique Designs. It is called our Pipette series, and it is a cylinder shaped stuffy where the body is the cylinder and the back end and the face are on the ends. So it kind of looks like an intimidating project, but we've set it up to make it as easy as possible for you. So we will show you how we are going to stitch this through, and each of them will be very similar with just basic different details. So this will help you along with any of the pipettes for the basic techniques of making them. So this is the 5x7 size in case you were wondering. So for the supplies we'll need, you can check out the tutorial. It has the various sizes of fabric that you need. I cut a strip of glitter canvas vinyl for the antlers, and I'm working with fuzzy fabric, so I have some water soluble topper for when I'm doing the face on that. I picked out an accent fabric for the inside of the ears and under the tail, and then the main fabric. So you need 2 pieces for your tube, and then a piece for your face and your back end, and then additional for the limbs, so the arms and the ears and the legs and the tail. So that's what we're starting with. So I've loaded hoop 1 into my machine, and I'm going to go ahead and stitch that step 1 placement on my stabilizer to show me where to lay my fabric. So you have our placements all stitched out. It is going to stitch the final outlines for all of these items separately. So it starts with the arms, the legs, the ears, and the tail. I'm going to use the same fabric for all of those, with the exception of the ears and the tail. I will use a different backing fabric. So I will use the main fabric on the front and the plaid on the back, and then I'll come back to show you the antlers because they're a little bit different. So we're going to place our fabrics right sides together on top of the hoop and stitch those final outlines. So I have stitched the arms and the legs. I chose the open version, which leaves a little hole, so after you turn it and add it to your stuffy, you can stuff the limbs and close them after you've finished it. It just eliminates bulk, which is a good thing on this design. Now for going to the ears and the tail, I'm going to flip this front fabric back because I would like to have 2 fabrics, and lay my accent fabric right sides together to do the ears and tails. So I have a different color on the bottom of the tail and the inside of the ears. So we've got the ears and the tail done. The legs are just flipped on the underside of that, and now we have to go do the antlers. You can trim that excess fabric away or just flip it out of the way, whatever you find easier. So the antlers are felty style, so you have to choose a non-fraying fabric. So you're going to lay the front side on the front of the hoop, up, right side up, and then you're going to flip the back side and put it right side out on the back so that the color shows on both sides, because we're not going to be turning this one inside out for felty style. So I am going to throw that on the hoop and slide this under the hoop face down. easier to see it on the glitter. You can see the outline there, as well as a placement line for adding it. I should have matched my bobbin thread. I used just my white, but I will use fabric markers to color that in brown so that it doesn't show as much on the back. But if you spool some of your top thread onto the bobbin thread, you can avoid that using that. So that's hoop 1. There is a stop star at the end, which is step 6. That just prevents the machine from running back up to the center and potentially catching on any of your fabric. So you can just skip that step. And we're going to move on to hoop 2, which is the tube body. So we've got hoop 2 loaded into the machine, and it is just the simple tube body. I'm going to stitch step 1 on stabilizer to show us where to lay our fabric. So it's just a rectangle placement that we've stitched, and you're going to lay your fabric over top. It's going to stitch a line here with a center line as well as the bottom. So you want to use it in a color that you're going to be able to see. I have 30 fabric, so I'm probably not going to be able to see it at all, but that's okay. We'll roll with it. So I added some water-soluble topper to that so you could see that there's just a placement and then a center marking line on both sides of the tubes. Now we're going to lay our back of our tube, right sides together, and run our final outline. And hoop 2 is as simple as that. We're all finished. There is a jump here that is your turning hole for your stuffie. When we're all finished, we'll be turning it through the side of the tube. So we're going to go ahead and load hoop 3, which is the face. So we have hoop 3 loaded into our machine, which is the face hoop, and we're going to go ahead and stitch the first step on stabilizer. So our first step is just the placement box. We're going to go ahead and add our fabric over top, as well as a layer of water-soluble stabilizer to make sure that the stitches don't sink in under that pile, and it will give us a nicer, cleaner look on our face embroidery. So we have stitched step 2 onto our fabric and water-soluble stabilizer. It has center markings, which are going to be helpful when we add our tube to make sure that we're adding it evenly. So we're going to go ahead and stitch through the detail steps. I forgot one piece of material for the face applique in my supplies list, so I just grabbed a cream for that, just a fleece. So we're going to go ahead and stitch the placement for that so we know where to lay our fabric. So our face placement has been stitched, and we're going to lay a fabric over top of that and tack it down. So we've secured that fabric in place, and we're going to go ahead and trim all the way around as close to the stitching as possible without cutting the stitching. My favorite scissors for these are the double angled. I will link them in the video. They take a little bit of getting used to, but if you force yourself to use them, they are very helpful. So we've got that trimmed, and we are going to go through all the details now. So the first step will be the satin stitch around the frame to secure it, and then all of the details. This is a very stitch intensive face. It has very large eyes, so there's a lot of stitching in a small area. So we do recommend that you slide another piece of stabilizer under your face to stabilize it before doing all the detail steps to give it the proper support that it's going to need for that amount of stitching. So we've got the satin stitch over the face applique, and we're ready to do all the details. I am just going to take an extra piece of stabilizer and just slide it underneath my hoop to give that face the support it needs. And then we're going to go ahead and stitch all of the detail steps. While your machine is doing this, you can cut out your limbs from your hoop 1 and just trim up your tube. You don't want to cut too much off the tube, but just trim the ends. So we've stitched the white of the eyes and then the 2 eye colors. You can do the 2 eye colors the same color, but that just adds a little bit of dimension to have a highlight color. Step 9 is your eyelashes. I'm going for a more masculine Rudolphy look, so I'm going to skip that step. So it's made optional, so you don't have to go and have eyelashes if you don't want them. So we're just going to move on to step 10. And stitch away the rest of the details. So I have all of the details done. At this point, there's my extra piece of stabilizer. I'm going to tear that off just to get rid of that for the placements, so I don't have a double layer to tear off later. So our next step is going to stitch our placements for our ear and antlers, as well as our legs. So we've stitched out the placement lines to show us where our feet and our ears and antlers are going to go. So if you have a hard time imagining how to orient them when you're tacking them down, you can lay them down the way you want them to look, and then each way you're going to flip them up over that line into the center, so our raw edges are on the inside, so that if that helps with your visualization of it. Now I'm going to do one at a time just to keep the bulk away as much as possible. On the ears, I have folded them down and then sewed them on my sewing machine. You want to make sure that you are doing them opposite directions so they're not exactly the same. So one will be folded down that way and the other way. So we've got all of our limbs tacked down with the raw edges to the outside and the ends on the inside. So now we're ready for our tube attachment. Our tube attachment has a lot of stops and starts to make sure that you get it in the right place so that you're not getting to the end and having a bunch of extra fabric. So we have made it with a lot of tack downs, and it's divided into 4 sections. So it's going to tack down your center mark here and then tack down the other center mark here so you have a quarter of it, and then stitch. There are moving markers that pull it into the corner every time it stops. So it'll stitch here, come down here. So it doesn't drag across your limbs and rip your hoop out of your project, because at this point you definitely don't want that to happen. So tack down here, moving marker, tack down here, moving marker, and then it will come up and stitch this quarter. And then we're going to repeat that for each quarter. So I've trimmed up my tube here. We want to have this center marker on the back as well. So you can take it and just guesstimate a bit with a fabric pen, or you can just take your scissors and sort of cut a little slit into that on each side, so that way you have on your tube the marker for the center of the back as well. So we are going to take our tube and get a side seam, and that's going to be lined up right under this marker. So we're going to slide it in under the hoop and just tack that part down. We're just getting that part in the right spot, so we don't have to worry about anything else. Just the center seam on that marker that's going to stitch next. So it's tacked down that left center, and it's just come down for a moving marker to keep it away from our limbs. And we're going to go to the next step. You could stitch the moving marker, but you don't have to. You can just manually forward through. So now we're just going to be tacking down the bottom center. So you want to take it and find that center marking on your tube hoop, and you want that to go right underneath your needle. Okay, so that has now tacked down a quarter of your, that stabilizer there, a quarter of your tube. So we've got it right on the center line, and then the moving marker comes back out here, and then we're going to move up here to stitch that final outline on just that quarter. So we know that we have exactly what we need for fabric on that tube. It stitched the final outline for that bottom left quarter. Now we've got another moving marker, which I know these are tedious, but they help you stop and realign your tube. So we can just take our tube and move it out of the way to the side, and go ahead and move to the next step by either stitching that moving marker or just manually going to the next step. So we're ready for our second side seam. So we're going to put our second side seam right underneath where our needle is. My fuzzy fabric's not helping, that's for sure. But I'm a glutton for punishment when it comes to fur. And we're going to go ahead and just tack down that section. So we have another quarter, and it's going to move again back here, moving marker, and then come and do the final outline. So we've tacked down here, moving marker, and come here. We're just going to flatten out our fabric from the bottom center up to the right side. So I'm watching these steps really closely. You may have seen me stop there and just realign my fabric if it's becoming not where I want it to go. So we've now done half of the final outline. We've moved up here, and we can move our tube out of the way by pushing it forward, and it's going to move up to this center line where we're going to be attaching where we made our little slit. So obviously we're just going to go to a little bit to the left or the right of the slit. A couple millimeters is not going to make a huge difference, so I'm just going to go up to that one, slide this fabric right under my needle, and stitch. Okay, so we've tacked down here, moving marker. We're going to be moving back down here, so we just want to make sure that our fabric is out of the way. And then we slide all of our fabric underneath, and we're going to stitch that top right final outline. Okay, so we've stitched that top right final outline. Now we just have the top left to do. It's already been tacked down on this side, so it just stops so you have time to get in there and just make sure that your fabric is all aligned and smooth to go to that final outline where you started. So you can just go ahead and stitch that step once you've got it lined up. So our last step is a stopping star, just to prevent it from going in on top of all that bulk, and we don't want to be having that awful crank sound of our machine because that doesn't feel good. So when you're finished, you should have the face inside of your tube tacked down all the way around. So you can go ahead and unhoop, and all we have to do is the back end, which is almost identical to what we have done. We just have a couple different attachments and obviously no details on the back. So I've gone ahead and loaded hoop 4, which is essentially the same as the face hoop. It's just you don't have a face on it. So we do have a couple different attachments. So obviously it'll have the tail and the legs instead of the front. I just trimmed around the excess of the face. You can wait till you're done, but it just takes away extra fabric. So if you want to double check at this point, you can turn it right side out just to have a peek at what that's going to look like and make sure that everything is looking all right, which it is. So we're going to turn that back inside out and carry on with hoop 4. So again, step 1 is just stitched on the stabilizer to show you where to lay your fabric. Okay, so we've stitched our placement box on stabilizer, and we're just going to lay our fabric over that placement box along with some water soluble stabilizer, which is your best friend for seeing what you're doing when you're working with anything with a pile. And we're going to stitch step 2, which will tack our fabric to the stabilizer as well as give us our center markings. So we've got to do our placements for our limbs. So for this hoop, we just have the tail. I just zigzag the bottom because it's a woven and I get paranoid about fraying, but you can just cut a longer inseam too, or seam allowance, sorry. And then our 2 legs. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch the placement for each of those so we know where to lay them. I've got those all tacked down, the raw edges towards the outside and the tips on the inside, and then we're going to go through the exact same tube adding procedure as we did for the face, except for we already have the face. So the most important part that is different for this is we want to make sure that our face is oriented correctly. If we have it upside down, then our tail is going to be down here instead of up here, and our legs will be up here at the top, which is not what you want. So you want to make sure that your face is face up so that the tail is on the top and the legs are on the bottom. So again, we're just going to take that center seam and we're going to slide it under our tack down. It's going to tack down here, move to that corner so we can reposition our fabric, and come here where we're going to tack down the center mark on our tube and then stitch our final outline. So we've tacked down here and then come back up, and we're going to do our final outline along that bottom left edge. So we've done that bottom left outline, and moving marker up here can move our bulk of our fabric away from our needle foot to move to the next step. And then we're going to take that center seam and again slide it right underneath that tack down center marker, so we can tack it down. Again, moving away from the bulk to that marker can move the bulk of our fabric up out of the way, and it's going to move to that bottom center so we can do that second section of outline. And we're going to pull that fabric underneath, make sure it is smoothed out for that bottom quarter, and stitch that second section of final outline. Okay, so we've gotten the second section of final outline done. It's going to go ahead and tack down the top center. I know this is a lot of steps and it can be tedious, but it's not difficult. So we're just trying to make it the easiest to get this even and not have your project ruined at this point. So we're moving on to that next step, sliding that little area that we cut just off, a little bit off the center, so we're not stitching right up the cut and not attaching it. Moving out of the way of the bulk so we can rearrange our fabric. And it's going to come down here to stitch the final outline. Once we've moved our needle down there, smooth everything out. We're almost around the home stretch here, so we just have our last quarter and it's already tacked down on this side from the start. So all we gotta do is make sure that we have our fabric smoothed out. Now in this, I have a little bit of extra bulk. I feel like this first section was a little tight. So all I'm gonna do is just sort of squish it a little bit underneath the needle foot so that it's got like just a little mini fold there. It's not much, but it's a little bit, and that happens. And it will stitch and it will be fun. And again, our stop star just to prevent it from sliding to the middle of our hoop. And we're all done. So it is a lot of steps, but they're fairly easy steps, and it's to make it as user-friendly as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and unhoop that, and I will trim up this edge and we'll show you what it looks like after that. Okay, so I've taken off the hoop and trimmed all my excess on the back. We have a turning hole on one of the side seams here, so we're going to go ahead and turn it right side out. So we've got it turned right side out. And I took off the water soluble stabilizer. I just pick mine off, but you can dissolve it obviously in water. Just to show you, it doesn't have to be perfect. We see our flaws, and this is where the the fur hides any manner of sins. But there's my placement line, so I was a little bit off on there, and that's just a basing stitch. I can just snip those stitches, so I probably won't even bother on this because it's so furry you won't be able to see it, but if you have a non-furry fabric, you can just snip those and pull them out. As long as our fabric is attached securely there, then you're all good to go. So we notice our flaws more than anyone else probably does. So you can go ahead and stuff the body, as well as I use the open limbs, so I have little holes to stuff there, and close them away. So I use my long tweezers for stuffing in the limbs. So I just take some stuffing and shove it in the limbs for an easy stuff. And of course we stuff the body through the side hole. You just have to close up the holes on your four limbs, or if you used closed, you don't have to if you're not going to stuff them. And then of course your turning hole on the side. You can use a ladder stitch, which the instructions are included in the tutorial, as well as there is a YouTube video, I believe, on it. It might be in the Facebook group though. And you can also use a whip stitch on a furry fabric because you are not going to see it, so it doesn't matter. So I hope you enjoyed making this cute little cylinder pipette reindeer. And we hope to have more of these to come. Let us know which one you'd like to see next.